Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful event, the UBS Roundtable discussion. My name's Professor Henrietta. I'm the founder and director of the Institute for Global Prosperity at University College London. Now, the IGP, as we call it for short, is a world-leading transdisciplinary research institution with a central mission to rebuild and redefine prosperity for the 21st century. And we work globally in many regions, including Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And we collaborate with academics, change makers, entrepreneurs, communities, and citizen social scientists to try and co-create dynamic and sustainable pathways towards improved quality of life, secure livelihoods, and social well-being for people and planet. So I'm delighted that you can join us here today for a discussion on universal basic services and on the welfare state. This is an enormously important moment because the new government in the UK is just days away from its first budget. It's also a part of our 10th anniversary celebrations. We're 10 years old this year, and we're very proud of what we've achieved. Now, we all know that we are, in the contemporary parlance of the moment, facing a kind of polycrisis of multiple intersecting challenges, and that today's best efforts to repair the status quo, which is going on all around us, are not working. And we need to do something rather different. It's clear that meeting these new challenges will require new thinking, new transformations, and that we have to start now. So we need a new vision for our societies around the world and our economies and indeed for the planet, and one that's really in the service of people's own livelihoods and of planet regeneration. And that new thinking has to work with or be aligned with principles of solidarity, of collective action and cohesion, and with the effort to try and capture a stream of values and benefits into the future, rather than focusing on today's income, economic value, and individualism. So to do this, we suggest a new approach to welfare and public service provision. And at the IGP and with other colleagues who are here today in the room, we've been calling for the implementation of a new welfare system fit for the 21st century, based on universal basic services. So the Social Prosperity Network published the first report on UBS in 2017. And the way we envisage it is that universal basic services are a collection of 7 public services, extending from those that already exist free at the point of need, so education, healthcare, and legal support, to covering other areas of life, including shelter, transport, food, and information services. And the aim of this approach to welfare is to provide the foundations of livelihood security and prosperity for all, but also to support individuals, families, and communities through the structural transformations in the economy that are coming and that are in fact already here. So colleagues in the room and on the panel will cover all of this in more detail. But at the IGP, we've been piloting UBS experiments and aiming to bring it to the top of policy agendas in both local and national governments. And countries such as Canada and New Zealand have picked up on the UBS concept, and there are countless other efforts going ahead in Estonia, in Luxembourg, in Vienna, in Geneva now, something perhaps happening next week in Rome. And we're also discussing how to bring UBS-type provision to the communities that we're working with in Africa and the Middle East. So moving on then to today's discussion, I'm delighted to welcome our guests. So first of all, at the far end, we have Andrew Percy, who co-chairs the IGP's Social Prosperity Network with me. He leads the IGP's work on 21st century welfare, and he was one of the lead authors of the first report in 2017. Now, Andrew has worked in cybersecurity in the UK and the USA since the early 80s. He's had a stint teaching in Egypt, and apparently he produced the UK's first hip-hop album with Positive Beat Records. So IGP is always at the forefront of what is coming. So Will Snell, who's on the end here next to me, is Chief Executive and founder of the Fairness Foundation and is a serial non-profit entrepreneur with experience in the UK and overseas. He designed and delivered a growth strategy for an evidence-based media health NGO And after that, he set up Tax Justice UK, which is a sister organization of the Tax Justice Network, TJN. I always get that wrong. And he joined Global Witness in May 2020 as interim chief operating officer, and then set up the Fair Foundation subsequently. Sorry, Will, slipping over there. And then next to Will, Dr. Lorena Lombardozzi, who is senior lecturer in the political economy of development at SOAS here in London. She was formerly senior lecturer in economics and co-director of the Innovation, Knowledge and Development Research Centre at the Open University. And Lorena has extensive field experience in both academic research and policy, particularly in East and Central Asia. And Katy Wiese is policy manager for economic transition and gender inequality at the European Environmental Bureau. And previously, she worked on renewable energy development projects in West and East Africa, and as a technical consultant for a social impact consulting firm in Berlin. And online, and not least, we have Max Harris, who is a barrister at Thorndon Chambers, having recently returned to legal work following a number of years in policy campaigns, academia, and writing. Max has worked as a campaigner and a policy researcher for a long time and has taken up campaign work on the part of Universal Basic Services. He has a long commitment to progressive politics, and he splits his time between legal research and work as a campaigner for Action Station. So welcome, please, to all our panelists. So rather than having presentations from everybody, I thought we'd just get straight into the questions. So feel free to ask questions from the floor also and to join in. So Max, let's start with you, because you kindly agreed to stay up late, very late in New Zealand, where it must be approaching midnight, I imagine. And perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about the campaigning and policy work on UBS in New Zealand and how you see that there.
Thanks, Henrietta, and nice to be there with you all. I hope you can hear me. It's always strange being online, but really nice to be at this event. And I wanted to acknowledge IGP's great work on Universal Basic Services. I might just mention some brief work I did in the UK. So inspired by IGP's 2017 report, I worked with several colleagues in the Shadow Chancellor's Office in 2019 on a report called Universal Basic Services, The Right to a Good Life. It was Rory McQueen and Mary Robertson. I found this to be a very exciting frame for thinking about expansive public services. And then I returned to New Zealand in early 2021. And since being back in New Zealand, there have been two big projects around universal basic services that I've had some involvement in. So one on fares-free public transport, free public transport at a local level, and the second on universal dental, free dental, and extending the public healthcare system into dental. I won't speak for too long about these, but just to give a little bit of colour, the fares-free public transport project came out of a mayoral campaign in 2022. So in New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland, where I am now, there was a mayoral election in 2022, and the progressive candidate, Efessor Collins, had as his landmark policy fares-free public transport. I was the campaign manager on that campaign, and we wanted to centre discussion of universal services. And so we did some polling showing that in New Zealand, 73% of people support fares-free public transport. We also commissioned a report with actually a UCL New Zealand academic, Jen MacArthur, looking at free public transport in Tallinn and Kansas City, Boston and elsewhere. And unfortunately, Efessor didn't win that election, but it did centre discussions about free public transport. And halfway through 2022, the New Zealand government at the time brought in half-price public transport. And I think the work done at that local level contributed to that change. And then secondly, just to mention briefly, this dental project with some trade unions and some anti-poverty campaigners and some health professionals, including some very progressive dentists. We've been working on a project called Dental for All since 2022. And we've done some similar things to the tactics I mentioned in relation to transport. So polling, showing in this case that 74% of New Zealanders support free universal dental, several research reports. And at the last New Zealand election in 2023, it was really encouraging. Two political parties had prominent universal policies on dental. So the Green Party had a kind of full universal dental package, and then the Labour Party put forward a policy of universal dental for under 30s. So lots of other things I could mention. In the 2020 election in New Zealand, another union, the Public Service Association, while I was still living in the UK, launched a small universal services campaign. But I suppose all these examples show that, the work that IGP's done and the idea of universal basic services is sort of alive and well, almost as far away from where you are now over here in New Zealand.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And great to hear that it's something you've done about dental, because there's quite a major crisis around dental provision in the United Kingdom at the moment. So let me turn to Katy. I think there's sometimes a little bit of resistance to ideas around universal basic services. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your work in the European Environmental Bureau and how you're advocating for UBS, or are you able to, in fact?
Yes, thanks a lot. Also, thanks a lot for having I feel like the discussions are much more advanced here, so it's very good to exchange. So maybe just one or two sentences on our organization. So we are an umbrella organization, so we are the largest network of environmental organizations in Brussels. We have around 188 members in 41 countries, and we work actually on a quite broad range on environmental topics, so really from agriculture, health, pollution, climate, and energy. And I'm in the economic transition team, which is a bit more horizontal. That's about, okay, how can we change the economic system to make it more socially and environmentally just? And here the UBS for us perfectly fits in there, because it tries to integrate social justice into environmental policies. Because I think what we've seen so far is there has been a little bit of an attempt to do this with, under the Just Transition umbrella of the European Commission. But I mean, these efforts really remain ad hoc, and it's more an afterthought. So I think what we see is more policies focusing on compensating potential regressive effects of climate policies, and we've seen with the protest also where this leads. Yeah. That being said, most of our members are traditional environmental NGOs, so they're don't necessarily work on social aspects. So I don't even want to exclude our network of working in silos. So that's why I would say we have like two strands how we try to work on this. One is that we partner with organizations like Neuroeconomics Foundations, which is also here, or social platforms, this is social organizations. And currently we try to get funding to build an alliance where we would have 2 or 3 year projects to have the time to get different organizations on board, have regular meetings, also do a theory of change, a little bit like mapping, okay, what are the opportunities in upcoming commission or EU term, and then to really do policy briefs together and showcase different practical examples, and then also going to policymakers in the commission and also in the European Parliament to work with them together. We did a similar thing with the on working time reduction. And then the second strand, I would say, is then also getting our environmental NGOs excited that they should also work on UBS, because in the end we also need the national members on board. And we started this by with a capacity building webinar. So we invited Anna to just briefly explain what is UBS, why it's important for the just transition. And I hope that if we get some funding, we can then continue this work.
Yes, and collaboration and alliance is what it's all about. And so we've also been working with our Economics Foundation. Yeah, it's very important to bring people together around these kinds of ideas and push forward together. So that's really important part of what we're doing. So Will, can I turn to you and your work at the Fairness Foundation and on public services in particular? And just ask you how you think that your ideas around fair necessities and fair essentials link to UBS, if they do, in your view.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me here. So I run a small think tank called the Fairness Foundation, which focuses on the UK, and what we aim to do is to persuade UK politicians, not always the easiest task, that inequality of all forms, but especially of wealth, should be a priority. So 3 arguments. One is the moral argument, that it's inherently unfair. 2, the political argument, the public are more concerned about wealth inequality and more supportive of action by governments to tackle it than we often think they are. And three, the policy arguments are ways in which wealth inequality is damaging our society, economy, democracy, environment, and so on, and what we can do about it. And we published what we call a wealth gap risk register yesterday, which sets out lots of evidence about the damage done to all of those things by wealth inequality, and what we can do about it, and what the public think about both of those things. And I haven't mentioned UBS yet, but how we're getting there. So a lot of the solutions that we are talking about are to do with UBS in some shape or form, and we talk in this report about the distinction between policy responses that aim to reduce the level of wealth inequality, obviously many of those including taxing wealth in various forms, and policy responses that aim to reduce the impact of wealth inequality in other spheres of life, and looking to European countries where levels of wealth inequality are as high or even higher than in the UK, but there are many more guardrails around it, whether that's around the influence of wealth on politics or the provision of a stronger social safety net, but also stronger universal basic services, basically of various forms, to make the absence or over-presence of wealth less important in daily life. And we, to properly answer your question, we define fairness in a multi-faceted way. We've got 5 principles of fairness, called the fair necessities, fair essentials, fair opportunities, fair rewards, fair exchange, and fair treatment. And all of those link, I'm not going to try and be on what they all mean now, but they all link across to UBS, I think, quite strongly. That no one should have below a certain floor kind of living. And this whole idea about reciprocity, which came out really strongly in the one report, it's very much an idea of fair exchange. So I can go on, but there's lots of ways in which all those things interrelate.
Thank you very much. And it's reciprocity, I think, and solidarity, very key sort of principles here for action around these issues. So, Lorena, you've been doing work on UBS and also on sort of how that might link to universal basic income and universal basic infrastructure. And I think the audience would sort of appreciate a very quick snapshot from you on sort of how you see this landscape of UBS, UBI, and universal basic infrastructure, and how you've been thinking about it yourself.
Yeah, so the way we conceived this trilogy actually started from a critique of the universal basic income.
Yes.
Together with 2 colleagues, 2 academics who are also active through the Brussels think tank, Foundation for Progressive Studies, which is the Brussels-based think tank of the party of the Social Democrats, European Social Democrats. So we were tasked to conduct a policy paper, interdisciplinary one. I'm myself a political economist / economist, Henrietta is a political scientist, and Neil Werner is a sociologist. We were basically starting from the observation that we live in, you called it a little bit a while ago, like a polycrisis.
Yeah.
We live into this triple crisis, which is the crisis of work. We've seen a devaluation of the working conditions, but also a steady decline of wages across the global north and obviously global south, because we are all connected. The second crisis that we observed is a crisis of care, which is something that political economists and feminist political economists have been observing and claiming for decades. But we live in a capitalistic society that makes reproductive work, so the work of cooking, household work, taking care of your kids, of your elderly, completely unpaid, completely free, and completely unaccountable within any indicators, economic indicators that our economic system. And this is a huge crisis. There is a huge crisis of care here. We've seen in the debate about childcare, about the cost of nurseries. I'm myself a victim of that. And the third crisis is the crisis of welfare. So we have been trying to historicize how did we arrive to this point where we have to beg and advocate politicians to re-acknowledge the legitimacy of public services?
Yeah.
And it was very interesting because at that time, the debate on UBI, so on universal basic income, was very successful. And we were wondering why this is, why this is the case. And so we tried to deconstruct theoretically this success and this debate by arguing that UBI it can be a very useful shock therapy in the sense that we live in a crisis of, I mean, there is poverty in the global north now. It's not that I'm a development economist by myself. Poverty is not a third world issue now. It is a huge issue with inequality, extreme poverty in this country. There are like food insecurity. I myself worked on food insecurity and food banks during COVID pandemic. And what happened is that UBI, in a way, created the condition to commodify and marketize even more these services, because it, in a way, enables the ideology that you can transfer money and resolve the problem. Whereas the UBS and the basic infrastructure, when we were trying to say, what is the alternative? How the welfare state, we don't call it in the same way, but is it kind of a contemporary word of seeing the welfare state, recreates the condition to decommodify those services. And also, potentially, that was very interesting to me, and sometimes it's not really acknowledged, reconfigure also the dynamics of production behind those services, which is at the end of the day are becoming increasingly privatized through public-private partnership, through outsourcing, and through a lot of jurisdictional and mechanism that have been going on for the past 30 years, and the European Commission also kind of enabled. So I think the beauty and the potential of the UBS is that are creating the condition to reinsert the debate about the legitimacy of the welfare state in a contemporary fashion. So by understanding what are the needs at the moment, the digital inclusion, for instance, is key, obviously dental and health, but also, for instance, what we've been looking at is the issue of care and care infrastructures, which is something that the universal basic infrastructure we're advocating for through the concept of infrastructure. Yeah. So having soft and hard infrastructures.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. And so yes, one of the main reasons I think why we have all been developing this argument around universal basic services is because it's not just enough to give people a little extra money. Lots of people need extra money and they should be given extra money, but actually what we need to do is to reconfigure the system itself.
Yeah. And
so that's a different thing. You cannot reconfigure a system just by giving people a little bit more in order to survive in a system that's actually undermining their ability to survive. So let's turn to Andrew. So Andrew, we've been working together on UBS since 2017. So perhaps just for the people in the room, if you could say a little bit about some of the UBS work we have been doing, that we actually just a quick case study.
So it's suitable for this is a 10th anniversary event for IGP. I also want to thank Henrietta for providing a home for UBS because it's been a really lovely place to be, and part of the reason for that is something that I see underlying all of the work that IGP does in various areas, is that you have to understand the conditions within which you act in order to understand how the action is going to affect. So it's very easy quite often for us to think of problems and then we think of the solution, but if you don't pay attention, and this is what I find in the IGP work, is to what the specific conditions are, then your action may not result in what you think it's going to do. And that basically UBS is not a direct action on something. It is an attempt to create conditions. It is part of a strategy for system change, which the larger objective is how do we get in a balance with our planet as a species globally. And to think through that problem, you need sort of systems thinking. And that is a very big and a very complex issue. You're going to be talking about energy and social conditions and the economic and the monetary system and the financial system and the history of how we got here. So that's fine in a sort of maybe this circle of us, right? But the question then is, how do you create the will to affect system change? How do we get the behavior change that everybody kind of knows is at the end of it? And so that's the idea behind UBS, is to create those conditions to enable people to make more pro-social, pro-ecological decisions in their own lives. Recognizing that we can't just, I think that's been a problem with the environmental movement generally. Yes, you have a green ambition, but the way you get there is through the humans causing it, right? That the environmental problem is a symptom of a human problem. So you have to go at the human problem. So this has been at the center, I think, of, what I would have hoped for UBS, and I think we're getting there, and this is a really interestingly diverse group of people coming at it from different directions, is that UBS should provide like a rallying flag, because there are as many different aspects to this problem as there are parts of the polycrisis, but we do need to come together around some simple messaging that creates the public will. Because our problem here is not that we have unsolvable problems that we don't know how to solve. We have solvable problems and solutions. What we don't have is will, public will, political will, and I mean, not say, and I think the politics I see quite often is leading the public. So I think you have to take responsibility for not creating the story that is sold to people yet. So what have we done with UBS? Well, we've run into that same roadblock like everybody else. So we have a giant economic system that has created over the last 50 years, maybe 200 years. I like to not call it the Industrial Revolution, we should call it the Fossil Revolution. Right? This has created a set of conditions in advanced human societies that is very difficult to break. So we are engaged in system change and up against a hegemonic economic system. We shouldn't be too surprised that we don't win every election, and that these, that this is a problematic, difficult process. But we're getting there, and it's been a pleasure to do it with the IGP. We've done a what, we've done a how, and we've done a why reports. So the first report was what is universal basic services. The second one we did, which is the teal colored one up there called national contributions, is how, because the first question is, how are you going to pay for that? It's going to cost a fortune. And the answer is no. And here's how. And then there's a why. Like, why to do this was really to set UBS in the context of system change. And that was the Universal Basic Prosperity Report. So I think having done those pieces of work, and we've attempted to work, I mean, as Max was involved in this, there was a moment in time in the Corbyn Labour administration in which they were seriously engaged with UBS as a potential policy mechanism narrative to get them to where they wanted to go. Unfortunately, I think they mixed it up with some other political ambitions, and maybe they didn't have enough time, and it sort of landed like a bag of sweeties on people's doorsteps in the election, and they didn't really know what to do with it. So we didn't get there. But what we've done at the IGP is we sort of reorientated, because there is real poverty in our societies. Where do you find that? Well, yeah, you find it if you go to Westminster and talk to some MPs, but they've got a lot of other things in the mind. But where you find it absolutely, people are aware of it, is in the more local you get. So working with local governments and local communities turns out to be an area where you don't have to make an argument that there is a problem, social problem that you have to solve. So we've gone that way, and we've worked really closely with Camden now over 5 years on a couple of pilots, a micro pilot from before. We've got another one that's going to run next year. Really exciting opportunities, because what we're trying to do now is build that evidence base to present back to national and an attempt to get a kind of policy change at that level. In the end, right, we need system change. So I think that that's where we've been. We've done these pilots, and then Henrietta and I are working on a plan that, again, to go local early next year. We're going to have forums based around UBS, bringing local groups, because a lot of people are already doing this work. It's not, there isn't a lot new here. We're just framing it, right? It's to bring local groups together in Liverpool, in Bristol, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Leeds, in London, into a room for a couple of days and say, how can you're working on food, you're working on digital, you're working on transport, how can you all work together? Because there's benefit in between, that sort of cascading benefits as Henrietta likes to put it. So that's another piece of work that we're doing, is to kind of take it local with the ambition that through local we can build an upswelling for bigger change.
Great. And I think I'm going to come back to this notion of experimentation and what's happening and ask you all about experimentation. But Max, could I just segue back to you for a moment and ask you that brief moment which Andrew has described in the sort of Corbyn-McDonald administration in waiting, so to speak, which didn't come to fruition. What was it about the UBS that attracted them? Why did it have traction for that moment, do you think? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can. That's a good question. I think universal basic services was a good frame for talking about expansive, ambitious public action. And yeah, I really liked what I think Lorena was saying about decommodifying. So saying, some things are too important for the market, and also through decommodifying, trying to change the dynamics of production. And I suppose, John McDonnell in particular, who was my boss at the time, was looking for policy that could move us towards a different kind of political economy. And, I don't want to speak for him, but I think that, universal basic services offered one important transitional step towards shrinking the role of markets in our lives, being less of a market-dominated society. And so, one example of a universal basic services policy was the broadband policy, which I also worked on in 2019. And that was about public ownership of fiber broadband, but also using public ownership to ensure that broadband could be free. And that was building on the work in the 2019 report, which had referred to information services. So that it probably needs a much longer answer, but hopefully that gives us a couple of initial thoughts.
Yeah, it does. And I think in a moment we do actually need to segue Carol into saying something a little bit about specifically what we mean, because we don't mean all of broadband free for everybody everywhere. So there are different things about service delivery that we do need to come on to in rather concrete ways. But let me just turn for a second again to Lorena. So Lorena, Andrew was saying that there are many things happening at the local level, and particularly around food. There are. I mean, I'm not talking about food banks, but I'm talking about new ways of developing food security for cities, or urban gardening, or food kitchens, which are coming up all across the world. In fact, there are different ways in which communities are trying to take charge of their own food security. And I think that's if you could reflect a little bit on that, do you think that the right way forward here is some kind of sort of experimentation at the local level with the provision of local services, or what will that step look like? Because otherwise it's just policymakers inventing something and then delivering it. Yeah. So how do you see, because food is quite a contentious issue, isn't it, in amongst the UBS portfolio, and can be a very emotive issue for people. People feel very deeply about it.
Yeah, food is actually, thanks for the question, because I think food is a very complex topic, because it represents the most immediate needs of the human being, but is one of the most complex, global, financialized, polluting commodities that we can think of, right? It's linked to oil, it's linked to energy, it's linked to commodity prices. So there are it's a huge scholarship about food. But going back to your question, I've been part of different projects and group of reflections about food in London, and I'm starting to have the same conversations with groups in Rome, where I come from, because the paradox is that we are all part of that. The dynamics are very similar. different stakeholders, different power relations, so like who owns the land, who is the administrator, who owns the stick, but more or less it's like the same kind of inequality, like spatial inequality. So the first consideration that we observe in different contexts is the relations with the public administrator. So the first point that we need to think about is the fact that it's true, they are responsive because they are the one who deals with those issues. So they are the providers. These are all the localized services. But there is lack of coordination across different offices. So in many contexts I've been working on food, you have those who deal with social policy that deals with, for instance, social marginalities, children. Then you have environmental offices that deals with the land allocation, the organic chain. And then you have, like, for instance, the education who deals with school meals. So we need, again, a system change, and the administrative disconnects reflect the fact that we've been thinking about these issues from a very anecdotal almost point of view. And at the end of the day, we resolve most of the issues through market mechanisms. So first, administrative disconnect that is like, it really is representative of why we're like in such a crisis and its functional system. Second of all, like the issue of who wants what. So the political economy issue. And the fact that food chains and the filière of food has been monopolized by private multinational corporations and private logistical provisions from the starting from the supermarket to the producers to the the global or now global retails, which have been even polluting the non-marketized system of food banks, for instance, because they keep dumping their waste on food banks and other mechanisms of like food charities. So we need to regulate, which is something that it can be done very easily, but like the idea of regulating the spaces where food is produced through, for instance, like having a quota of like land allocated to in urban areas, but also creating effective governance system where you have local communities who can have effective voices within the process of constructive, sustainable food value chains. So there are piloting projects that are being financed also through small projects at the university, but like the idea is that you can connect social marginalities, public services, resources to create experiment, going back to the experiment, that and satisfy what local people need, which is not much. It's basically building a community, creating, effective services that are going a little bit beyond the transfer of that service, but also create, like a let's say also a political environment that is make this service thrive. Because one of the main critique of the market fanatics sometimes is that you create the condition to establish a welfare system, but if you don't maintain, like there is all maintenance costs, there is like, all costs attached to maintaining those services, then the system collapses again and it becomes inefficient again. But if you make your like local people like and community participate in those systems, they will have the first interest to make this system thrive.
Yes, that's right. No, I think that's very important. And it's also about multi-stakeholder partnerships between communities, civil society organizations, local businesses, everything at that moment. And I think we need to come on to that in a minute, but we'll get there. We're just moving around. Katy, could I segue back to you for a second and say, well, this notion of experimentation in policy and this new idea of UBS, I mean, how do you think that that on the sort of in the broader context of the EU at the moment, this discussion about UBS and provision of basic services is being received. Do you think there's appetite for that? Or do you think there's more appetite in certain parts of the EU than others, or how does that look to you?
Yes, I would say when it comes to civil society, it's quite positive and there's increasingly an interest. So I've also been contacted by other NGOs who would like to know more about the work that we do on UBS. And I mean, we've been also discussing this. There are also very positive examples in some EU member states, be it in Estonia or I think social housing in Vienna, or I think public transport in Luxembourg. So this has been all encouraging and also been shared. And I think it was also encouraging that Enrico Letta, who's this former Italian Prime Minister, so he was also tasked with a report by the European Council and Commission to set out a strategic vision for a more competitive Europe. So you might have heard of the Draghi report, but this was a report that came before, so that's out in public. But he's been making the case for the importance of he's calling it public services, referring to service of general interest and building a more resilient society. So one of his key recommendations, basically, the implementation of accessible, affordable, and adaptable services of general interest, because he's also saying he sees that necessary, or he sees the lack of public universal or like good public services in many member states now as a barrier for EU students to access the single market. I mean, it's also still the growth I'm thinking behind this. He also says this is necessary to strengthen social and regional cohesion, which is what I think is in line with what we also want.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always the question of the political relevance of this report, but I think for us, it's still a good starting point to say, going to the Commission, hey, you put money into this report. This is one of the key recommendations, like what are you making out of it, or what is the next step? And then on the other side, I also have to say that at the moment, the interest didn't really lead to any political consequence at the moment. So, I mean, one aspect is also that the new commission is still forming itself in the parliament, but I think it's also related to certain challenges. One that I encountered also when we asked for funding is that people still don't necessarily understand the difference between the public provision by the state now and what universal basic services are. So I think there's also more needed, and I think the examples that we discussed today can help. There are also further concerns about funding, of course, always. I mean, the EU also just had the reform of the EU fiscal rules, so basically the fiscal rules limiting EU budgets, and unfortunately, that will mean austerity or budget cuts for many member states in the upcoming years. And sadly, social services were one of the first ones to cut. And there are also discussions on the role of the state. So I feel like during COVID, there was a bigger role of the state with, also the Recovery and Resilience Facility, this big pot of money that was created to help with the recovery of member states. But now I see like, it's actually going a little bit back again. I'm also from Germany, so now there's discussion on unemployment benefits being too high and not encouraging people to work. We also had this €9 ticket, which was basically you pay €9 per month and you could use any regional train in Germany, which I think is like comes very close to universal basic services. This has been a lot in question because things said, okay, it doesn't really discourage people from using the cars. It's been too expensive, etc. Of course, always then coming back to infrastructure. So we also need to ensure the infrastructure before we then implement such a ticket, because I think this was also a problem. And then in the EU, there's of course also the problem that the EU lacks the competency on social protection and security schemes. But I do, because they fall under national jurisdiction, but I do still feel like the EU can still take steps moving forward, like implementing policy frameworks or making recommendations, or also allocating certain funding for experiments. I know the DG, the Directorate for Employment, at least they did something for a job guarantee scheme. So I think they pulled like, I don't know, 2 million or something to do experimentation. So that's what I hope we can do moving forward. But yeah, with also the rise of the right-wing and conservative parties, it will be a bit of a, it will be challenging also to face this.
It will be challenging.
Yeah.
It will be challenging. But I think one thing we can do is to begin to articulate more clearly the links that exist between improved quality of life and improved forms of productivity under a rethought system. But our notion of productivity at the moment is very extractive. It's it's extremely connected to a very narrow understanding of growth. And I think we know that productivity is something which comes from people actually being able to be better in themselves, to hope for a better future, to link to each other more effectively. So solidarity drives productivity. So if I could turn to you then, and thinking about this notion of experimentation. So the work you do on sort of on fairness and so on. I mean, here, how are you managing to articulate that in terms of the role of the state? Because there is still this argument about what the role of the state is. And if there are those who argue that it's not the role of the state to get involved in universal basic services, I can be pretty sure that there are many, many people who think it's not the role of the state to be involved in fairness. So how are you dealing with this kind of problem about what the role of the state is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and obviously one that, given that we work in the UK, the context around that debate has somewhat shifted with the election of the new Labour government. And there is I think there is a level of acceptance that the state kind of should play a bigger role, but that's by no means guaranteed.
Yes.
It's complicated and nuanced. I think what we're trying to persuade politicians and influencers of, and to some extent the broader public, though indirectly, is that the state has to play an enabling role in a way that goes quite a long way beyond what we have at the moment. And so thinking about the kind of philosophical underpinnings, there's a sort of John Rawls type argument, and many people on the left think are critical of Rawls's work and see it as being a sort of defense of the status quo. But I would argue that when he talks about providing genuine quality of opportunity, and so the way that we conceptualize fair opportunity, delivering that requires radical action that only the state could initiate, remove barriers to opportunity. And so while there is clearly a role for private sector and for civil society and so on, we very much talk about the need for the state to play an active role in effectively rebuilding a social contract. That when we're looking at I think the opportunity mission in the UK is a good example, which, and it's positive that the Labour government recognises that the opportunity mission can't just be about what happens within the school system and broader education system. The barriers to educational opportunity outside the kind of classroom gate, whether that's around housing or social security or income and work and all these other areas, are an integral part of that. And we can't do anything other than press politicians to make to ensure that strong government action is a part of that. And I think it's, as has been said before, this is also the challenge here. It's about the commodification of several broker markets. And I think there are numerous challenges to trying to make that argument. But I would love to see more business voices coming out and talking about the need for certain key services to be decommodified and better regulated and so on and so forth, in the same way that the patriotic millionaires are calling for wealth taxes, so in the kind of Turkey for Christmas kind of conceit. But that's a good way of getting some media coverage and general attention. Let's try and find some private sector voices who are making those up.
Yes, well, we've got one sitting right there. So let's go back to this point, which is very important. So you're pressing the government. So Andrew, can I come back to you for a second and ask you just to talk briefly again about why doing experiments at the local level is so important, basically listening to what Lorena said, and and what's happening with the communities that we're doing these experiments with.
I think what I've heard everybody talk about is this. To a certain extent, it's a policy sequencing problem, but we have to. How do you get public support and will behind this kind of change? And the short answer to the version of why are you doing experiments? Well, apparently to build the evidence base that we are a cooperative species. which is like the weirdest thing to ever say, you know, because we are the most cooperative species that has ever existed. A very recent story out explaining about why we were sort of replacing Neanderthals, and maybe we were more violent, but largely because they lived in very small groups. And we lived in much far bigger groups, so we could transfer knowledge between us much more effectively and best practices spread. We are a deeply cooperative species, and yet here we are at this sort of carbon pulse of fossil energy has individualized us, and we've become blind to the negative effects of that individual action, and at the same time blind to the positive effects of collective action. And so we find ourselves effectively having to re-educate ourselves about how this stuff works. So I can lament that, and we can think that's sad and tragic, but that is the reality. So that's the role of experimentation. We are rebuilding the evidence case that we are better and stronger if we cooperate and do things together. Not everything. You sort of touched on this just now, maybe Henrietta. You know, not every service. So part of the difficulty of being sort of framing UBS, and we've, I think, both of us, been trying to be always not clear and definitive. Like, we don't mean exactly this with this service, because what we're actually starting from the point of is, how do you create the headspace in individuals, members of our society, that they can make, and we can collectively make more pro-social and pro-ecological choices. So those 7 services are a way of trying to frame that, right? But it's not just those 7. Maybe it's something else. I mean, maybe we didn't mention childcare. I mean, I tried to think, you know, the care category, I think, is a better way of naming that thing. It's not just healthcare. It's not just childcare. It's care for each other. These are all ways of describing how do we create the conditions that enable us to take different decisions that lead us to system change. So I'm, you know, accepting that we do have to do this work. The experiments are part of creating a sort of classic evidence base couched in the terms of today's narrative, some economic, we're going to save local government this much money, right? And it's you know, and that is the work, right? We're trying to achieve something much bigger, larger lives for ordinary people, as Roberta would put it, but actually the way we build that evidence case is much more concrete, and that's what we do. And so, you know, the plan is here in the UK specifically. I think a lot of us think that there's going to be an opportunity somewhere in about 18 months or 2 years' time that this government might be looking for some new ways of doing things. So we'd like the evidence at that point.
No, thank you for that. I'm just going to segue back to Max on an issue about inclusivity, Max, and then open up to the floor and ask Anna to make a comment first, because she's also been working on this thing. So Max, thinking about all this discussion we've been talking about at the local level and so on, I mean, how would this play out in the kind of New Zealand context of trying to get an understanding of a relation between groups of people, between people and planet and the environment, between people and the economy, which is based on Maori principles understood more broadly? And how does taking account of those indigenous ideas around a way of taking care of the planet and of others, how could that connect to a UBS discussion in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one way of thinking about this is there are some Maori academics and campaigners who have talked about the continuities between Maori ways of thinking and universal basic services. So these scholars like Matt Scobie is one, have talked about like a long history of collective provision of resources and collective distribution of resources in New Zealand's Indigenous past. So Maori have been in New Zealand for about 800 years, and they point to examples like collective ownership of waka, canoes, hakari, which are like collective feasts, and thinking about the connections between this and a model of collective, accessible collective resources. But I think this is an area where there needs to be kind of more thinking and work. And actually there's also been, I would say, some challenges around talking about universal basic services in this country, because sometimes the language of universalism has been used by the right in New Zealand to oppose measures to protect Indigenous rights. And so in advocacy for universal services in New Zealand, I think it's been important for advocates to say that universalism doesn't preclude some particular measures that redress historical injustices or support Māori. And I think people have used sort of modified versions of proportionate universalism. I think that term that Michael Marmot uses about how you need sort of targeting on top of universalism. So yeah, to summarize, I think there are, there's really rich thinking about values among Indigenous communities and rich histories of different kinds of political economy, and that can be connected up to universal basic services. And I think some of the most exciting political thinking in New Zealand is drawing on some of these Māori visions, political visions. But a further point is that I think talk of universal basic services has to be done carefully, at least in this country, to ensure it's not used to kind of flatten out differences between people. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Now we're going to open up to a few questions, but before we do, and I wonder if you'd just like to come in and reflections on what you've heard from the panel and on your most recent thinking on UBS.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, and thanks a lot to you for sort of kicking this whole thing off in the first place, and inspiring so many of us to think and develop these ideas. So I'll never forget that moment in 2017 when you published that report. Yes, this is the sort of thing we need. And also hats off to Max for doing that great paper for a previous sadly, well no, you know, and I fear that one of the problems we have now with government, well you may not, I would like to know what you think about this, is that if you mention universal basic services in the leader's office today, they'll go and check back that it was the other lot back in 2019, and therefore it can't possibly be right. So, and I do think we've got an enduring issue about what we call it, how we present it. I have not been there, and I've been working solidly on this for since 2017 nearly. For a book with Andrew, or the case for universal basic services, which is a bit out of date now, but still puts out the arguments. I think it's still a useful reference. So, but calling it universal basic services, which worked really well at the time, I think it remains, and you know, if you want to tell the story, it takes time, doesn't it? It's like always fine. Well, what do you mean by universal basic services? So you're being asked this by a politician or somebody in the media, and you know, it's terribly difficult to boil it down, even though it's a really good story. I would say so. Three things. One is the value is about understanding and valuing the in-kind benefits as a form of income for people. So the virtual income and the social wage, and the part that plays, the redistributive role that plays. And I'm not talking very, very popular language here, but it's about the redistributive effect. So it's a very, very good way for tackling poverty and inequality because of the value, which is always overlooked, of in-kind benefits, which are universal basic services. Then there's the point we've been trying to make, working with Katy on this, that environmental goals cannot be reached unless we go down this route. Both because we need to make people feel that their needs are being met. Otherwise, they will assume governments don't care about them and will be against any environmental policies and net zero goals and so on. But more to the point, that if you organize the delivery of life's essentials through services collectively, you can cut carbon and use natural resources far more efficiently and effectively than you can if you do it through markets. And then the third thing is, you cannot have, I mean, our government now has said, oh yes, we really want to support public services, but we've got to grow the economy first. You cannot grow the economy if you can't meet people's needs. And so this is an engine for developing, and I would never say a growing economy, because I think there's a real problem there, but a prosperous and a thriving economy. So those three things are really important about this agenda. And I think I just want to say how much I agree that it will be a long time before we can ever get the government to sign up to this in the same terms that we use. But the more we can provide local examples of things that look a bit like it would be in practice if it were done across the country, and the more we can do the modelling that shows, for example, the value of public services in creating decent living standards, these are the sorts of things we need to be doing now. And I think the problem we've all had is finding the funds, basically, the resources to do the work on that scale, to do these local examples, because local authorities are so strapped for cash, as you know. It's very hard to get them to do anything much. They can do a bit. So we need the funds, and we need, we need a good story. We need the good funders, and this needs to move out of academia into the world of policy and people.
Yes.
But good for you.
Well, we're trying to do that with our experiments, but we have lots of questions. We can continue asking the panel. Perhaps we'll take a few questions from the floor for questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Really fantastic panel. I want to pick up on something you've already discussed, but really center in on. So we've had some discussion about the importance of geography, and actually Anna was also pointing to time, so space and time. So what Max was telling us about what works in New Zealand is not the same as the UK. And then what I'm curious about is hearing a bit more about this. So firstly, do we need different narratives to make the grades in different EU countries? And then what about the local scale? Is what resonates in London the same as Liverpool and Glasgow, or which things are resonating in all three spaces, and which need to be different? So it's an open question for everyone, because we've got lots of really interesting experiences.
And why don't you lead off, because that's been one of the things we've been working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Localization.
it sort of comes back to how do you want to, if we define this correctly, right, it is a very broad objective, which is to satisfy a set of basic needs that enhances the safety of individuals in whatever geography they are in. That's going to be specific to their geography, and that enables them to live a larger life and make more pro-social decisions. So in that context, a sort of pre-universal basic services at IGP, that was the sort of original concept, was just a very loosely defined set, like how do you create the conditions that enable that behavior? So that would be my answer, is yeah, absolutely it's local and it's different, which is why it's always been, and it was in our first report, right alongside this is a devolved power, enable local assemblies at a much smaller scale than we do in this. We're the most centralized country in Europe, in the UK, and we could learn more from them, but anyway, pushing power down so that exactly those service decisions get made close to the person that they're trying to create that environment. Is I think part of the plan. Is that, yeah.
So let's turn to Max. Max, do you think we need a New Zealand narrative, or do we need 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 New Zealand narratives? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe just two thoughts on that. One is, I do think, and as the panel said, there are common structures that have to be challenged in at least New Zealand and the UK, if I can speak to those places. So neoliberal capitalism has also hollowed out the state in New Zealand and state capacity. And so one big question that comes up when universal basic services are raised is, can the state deliver this? And that's a question that I think would come up in the UK as well. Or should this be targeted? Shouldn't we save money? That kind of austerity mindset, which I think is prevalent in the UK as well. So I guess point number one is, I think there are those common structures that do need to be challenged in the same way. But yes, of course, I think how the messaging happens and the examples that are used need to be tailored to local histories. One, to draw on the local discussion, I think this possibly also applies in the UK, but one example that worked well in the Fares Free public transport kind of campaign was talking about local libraries as universal basic services, where and lots of communities in Auckland have good connections with their local libraries. But there's a different approach to the healthcare system. For example, in New Zealand, there's I think less cultural treasuring of the public healthcare system than in the UK and with the NHS. So those kinds of differences, of course, mean that the messaging needs to be adjusted.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take the question right at the back first.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I was just quite interested to hear like a bit more about specifics of like the local work in Camden and like what's going on there, what evidence have we got, and sort of what you're looking for now.
Yeah, so I mean, briefly, because we should probably take that offline and we should talk to you directly and we can send you some links. So they did a pilot just pre-COVID, micro pilot that was just digital and transport in that one, and they've got some evidence that they've pushed up there. You know, what evolves out of that is which I always love, which is that it's a lot of the benefits are between where we didn't think of them, that the reason that this person was able to get their child to hospital in a timely manner to prevent a larger issue arising from a health issue was because they had a free bus pass, and it was, you know, late on a Sunday and they didn't have any other form of transport, they didn't call any friends, but they managed to get their kids to hospital. And you go, wow, there's sort of cascading set of benefits that you end up in places with things you wouldn't have thought about. So that there's plenty of outcome like that, and we can point you at a really great presentation that Camden did. If you talk to Graham on your eye at the end, we can send you that link to get your email. And then the pilots that we're doing in Camden that are currently scheduled, we think, for January, February. And so we'll have results on that in the late spring, early summer.
Yes, but the idea is to look at the intersections between a number of actions on universal basic services. And very often, as Andrew says, the important thing is how one creates a knock-on effect which is beneficial. And so what we're looking for in Camden ultimately is how you use your money better to create a better result for people, right? And we actually think you could actually reduce the cost of many of these things by approaching that problem differently. And I'm very keen to see whether that will be possible. I have a question here, I think.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, say, national government did show an interest in taking this up. I can almost see the headlines from the Daily Mail, communism. And I think that with the shift towards right-wing populism that is across Europe at the moment, that is going to be one of the biggest barriers to messaging.
Oh.
Is there anything that you're thinking in terms of how you're going to tackle that?
Yes, so we have been working a lot on this, and we were just talking about, actually, just as we were all coming into the room, we were nattering between ourselves as a panel. And we were saying you need a new label rather than universal basic services. So we're going to be starting to think about that. But I think one of the issues here is to think about what people are saying on the ground, and what they're saying is that life is too uncertain, it's too difficult, it's too miserable. And we're not talking here about the bottom 10% in the United Kingdom, we're talking about the bottom 4 deciles, right? So this is now becoming almost half the population. So these stories that you're hearing in the press are actually fundamentally correct. So you have people who are living together in a household, there are 2 working adults. They both have more than one job and they still can't feed their children. Okay? In one of the richest countries in the world. But something is very badly broken there. And I think what we need to do is to create that solidarity with people who are experiencing that issue and use their language and their way of talking about things. So that's what we were talking about at the beginning. And I think there is a lot of work to be done there. And that's something that we've been working on in the IGP, not directly in the UK so much recently, as we have been trying to think about what would be a version of universal basic services or social protection for the transformation that are coming in the economy for Africa. So we've been doing it for Kenya and Tanzania. We're also doing it for Lebanon. And these are extremely challenging circumstances because the character of the state is very different in all those contexts. And also we need an enhanced role for business and for small business in this delivery mechanism, so that they are actually gaining some benefits from being part of the delivery of that care process. So we've lost that because we've now out-resourced so many of these functions. So one of the great problems of the UK, since we've out-resourced elder care, it's too expensive. You know, so on the one hand, not paying the people who are doing it, whether they're in the private sector or they're in the home property, but it's also too expensive. Even to people saying things like, well, you know, what are we going to do? I mean, it's too expensive to take care of the elderly. So what are we going to do? Park them in a bus stop? You know, there is no sensible answer to these kinds of questions. And I think we do have to deal directly with that. But I think it's about working with people themselves and communities. And so that's something that we're doing in different parts of the UK. And that's part of the work that Andrew will be picking up on these fora.
I'd be interested, Will, you're trying to change language around
Yes,
presentation.
How are you doing with long fairs?
Have you got some tips?
Yeah, what are the top tips?
So I should say, I mean, we're not framing in bond experts, there are plenty around. But, I mean, I think, yeah, how do you guard against the Daily Mail headline that they mentioned that or whatever? I think sort of leaning into some of those areas where so this is in the UK, but most Brits have this sort of very strong sense of fairness. Does that mean, I think if you're talking about things in terms of some of these very kind of deep rooted, going back to how we build up from the Neanderthals via violence or other means, what binds a social group together? You know, this sense of that everyone should have their basic needs met, that everyone that you're contributing into society in some way, and that you're working with opportunity to do that, and that you're benefiting from society in return, all that sort of stuff. That framing and that these sorts of interventions are enablers of opportunity and allowing people to exercise their responsibility and to look after their family and all those things. There are ways of framing some of these things that appeal to the vast majority of the UK public and to the leader writers of the Daily Mail, and our ways of helping to sell that also into Morgan McSweeney and all this now that he's Uber, Wiese or whatever at number 10, in ways that don't immediately make people think, oh yeah, this is what Corbyn and co did 5 years ago. So I think that's how I would do it. And I mean, it's also interesting that the Daily Mail, as far as I'm aware, aren't going completely crazy about British energy or about some of the plans around railways, which you might think. So maybe that's because they're tapping into those sorts of arguments.
Maybe, but maybe they just need to get to work on the railway, so they know they can't. So now they've been coming back to something more. I think we have just one last question there, and then final comment from Anna, because we're on time. Yeah. So please.
Thank you for all your insightful views on this event. I've got a lot of questions on that. What is the way to like the paternalism, like the power concentration, or the you're doing kind of reallocation of these resources? And another question follow it is that the UBS will use the base of the concrete construction like this. Will it be a challenge when you're negotiating with some personal institution, they have the personal ownership or the properties in the conflicting with this kind of abuse?
Paternalism and the infrastructure, Andrew.
Paternalism and infrastructure.
Do we have to put the whole infrastructure into place?
I mean, I think what I hear you talk about is power, right? I mean, so that's when I say how do we get public will, right? That's about getting the power, shifting the power, really, because that's I think where our people come from. So you point to, I think, very valid questions. We followed out our states. We don't have the infrastructure. How do we re-enable private sector, small scale businesses in delivery of services or create benefits that go to them? I think that, I don't know that I have anything to add. That's about, I don't have a solution for your problem. I think you're pointing at very specific issues that are what we're all trying to do, which is create a framework, build the support that means that power shifts, because you're, as the way you describe it, right, you've got this institution with all the power and you're kind of applying as a supplicant to make change, right? That can change, right, where they may hold some resources, but the weight of power is on change, and that's a different negotiation.
I think that,
Sorry,
I think,
Katy.
It's very Brussels view, but I think what we could do in Brussels, for example, or what we're working on at the moment is having a follow-up from this recovery and resilience facility, you know, this big investment package that we had for the recoveries, and it will end in 2026. So we are advocating for a new transformation fund, which would, under of course strong environmental and social conditionalities, but it could be used to build the infrastructure that is needed for well-functioning UBS. Maybe we can also circumvent a little bit in the narrative on this, what we call this, but yeah, this is an idea that we could do in Brussels, and also because yeah, I think the problems are very different on a local level, and also the fiscal capacity of member states is very different. So Italy has high debt, so they might not be able to do the same investments that we could do. And I don't know if there's something similar you could have in the UK, or if there's any follow-up of this such a big investment package, but it could be also, yeah, one way to guarantee some of those.
We're going to borrow lots of money to create a wealth fund.
Yeah, can I add something? Can I add something very briefly? Actually, the Women's Budget Group, which is like group for, estimated some calculation, and the idea is that if you invest in care infrastructure, you would be able, through employment creation and through investment in this infrastructure, would be able to get a multiplier effect, for which you want, like you would immediately kill the efficiency or austerity kind of problem. So even if you do the math, it doesn't make any sense to create this, to reinforce this rhetoric that building, investing in care is something that is like inefficient or a losing game.
No, we need to pick that up again, because we need to reconnect the well-being and the flourishing to the question of enhanced productivity. So this is something that we need to do. It's a phase.
Yes.
That we need to get right. So we've had a fantastic discussion. And would you like to just sort of say a word or two, and then we can?
Just one here, thanks. I just want to on this thing about the right.
Yes.
I've always thought that this agenda can trump the right. Yes, I know. I need it. I think because the right gets its power from appealing to people who feel that their needs are not met.
Yeah.
And that they're left behind by government. And so this is the best way to counteract the rising power of the populist right. So that's something. And the other thing I just want to say is that as we search for new ways of framing and messaging, don't let's lose sight or stop using the term university services. Because that's what we came up with, the social guarantee, and we've been running a campaign for the social guarantee. And it's not right, because it doesn't do the environmental angle sufficiently from my point of view. But also, whenever I go outside the UK, everyone wants to talk about universal basic services. And so, it has caught on in circles, and people will need to recognise, they need to be able to connect what they've already got hold of with whatever new framing and messaging we're using.
You want to say something? Yeah.
No, I mean, I was thinking about like, that you want to give up the legacy of the success that has been built.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just to conclude, and I mean, the idea that you were talking about, like, why, we need to justify to the, conservatives around the world, because, I agree with you. I mean, the institution and history might change, but across the world, the structure is still the same. So we are still fighting the same power structure eventually. I mean, we have instability issue. I think it's, what we call social contract, and what, like the socio-economic order is falling apart. And I think like the environmental crisis, the social crisis, is there. Nobody makes the dots. We need to a system change, and an instant analysis will allow us to finally connect the dots of all these crises and justify the reason to implement those changes. So I think it's true to advocate and like be present in the policy making, but it's also like very important what you've been doing. So create, you know, the analytical framework for us to be solid about both the empirical and theoretical level. So good luck with it.
This is good, and thank you for the endorsement of the strategy of the Institute for Global Prosperity. So that's very good.
No, and
No,
the
thank
theoretical
you.
exercise, yes.
So I think we've had a wonderful panel discussion. We've been very lucky. We've been very lucky to have Max online. It is now sort of 1 o'clock in the morning this time, or 1:30 in the morning. Max, thank you so much indeed for your patience with us. Thank you all for being here, for taking part, and for your questions and so on. And thank you especially to our wonderful panelists. So please join me in thanking them.